Nowadays, there is so much focus on dependency injection. I find that a lot of new developers are only exposed to interfaces in the context of using it with dependency injection. So in this video, I want to explain about what interfaces are. I've got a code example, and with that, I'm going to speak about some of the problems you're going to experience the first time you start using interfaces. Let's get into the video. So an interface really is just a set of rules or a particular structure that a class needs to adhere to say it matches that contract or it meets those specifications. So let's look at a quick example. We have a class here called thing. It has two properties and a bunch of arbitrary methods. Then we have an interface called iCoolThing, which has a set of requirements. To be an iCoolThing, we must have a property called myCoolInt, we must have a method called getSomethingCool, and we must have another method called doSomethingCool that has two parameters. So to see if our thing class meets that criteria, let's go through some of the methods and see are they a match. We can ignore some of these other ones because they're not, and if we have a look, each of these are a match. And we don't care about what happens inside of these methods. We're really interested in just the signature. If the signature matches what's in the interface, then it is it meets that requirement. It meets that specification. And by signature, the name of the method needs to match, and each of the parameters being used needs to match, not the content, not what's inside the method. That is not important. So in this situation, the thing class is a iCoolThing. So here we can say it implements the iCoolThing interface. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Let's look at a real world example where you would want to use an interface to improve some rudimentary basic code. So I have a simple application here that's just going to send a notification to a person, a user, and based on the user's preferences, we can either send an SMS or an email. Here we defined who's sending the data, what the content is that would need to be sent in the notification. Here we go and fetch the user's information from some data source, database, or wherever it is. And then here we check the preference. If it's a SMS, we will send them an SMS. We've got some complicated code here that performs the SMS. That's not relevant. So instead, we're just going to print a message on the screen. And if their preference is email, likewise, we're not going to bother with the real email. We're just going to print a message on the screen. And here we've got our two types of notifications, and here's the details about the person with their two different addresses and their notification. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this, so while this code is fine and it'll work, we want to improve to provide it better flexibility, and we're going to be using interfaces to improve the code. So the first thing we want to do is extract the code that generates both the SMS and the email into their own classes so that we can reuse them. Then likewise, we'll do the same thing with the SMS sender. Then it's just a case of instantiating each of the classes. Likewise, we'll do the same thing. We'll have an email sender. Okay, so let's just run this and see if it still works. There it works. It's sending an SMS. Here's the content of the SMS. There's the mobile number to and the from. Okay, so this works great, and technically we've improved it. We can still do better. It's pretty clear that we have some repetitive code or some common functionality between both the email sender and the SMS sender. They both have a from address. They both have a to address, and they have some form of content or body which is getting used to populate the SMS or the email. So what we can do is and what we should always be striving to do is not repeating ourselves. So in this situation, we can extract that common functionality and make use of an interface here. Let's start by going and saying we want a public interface, and let's give it a name. Let's call it a notification sender. As per the Microsoft standard, you need to make sure that your interfaces always are prefixed with the capital I. Okay, so and let's define the contract or the specifications that that make something a notification sender. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that a iNotification sender always needs to have a single method, and it's going to be called send notification. It has to take a from address, and it has to take a to address, and it has to have some body or content. Let's call it content. Okay, and that is just it. So what we want to do now is we want to see, does our email sender and SMS sender meet the specifications of our new contract that we've just created. So what we can do is we can say email sender now implements this is the notation to say it implements iNotification sender, and we got a squiggly line because there's a problem. And if we look at the error that we're getting, it says that email sender does not implement the interface member send notification and 3 strings. So there it's saying we don't match the rules of the contract. And why don't we? Because it looks pretty similar. It doesn't meet the exact specification. So what we need to do is we need to change the name. So instead of send email, it needs to be called send notification. Still does exactly the same thing. You'll notice that the names of the parameters are not an exact match. That doesn't actually matter. What matters is the type of parameters and the order in which those parameters occur. So that's great. Our email sender now implements iNotification. Let's do the same thing with SMS sender. iNotification sender. Cool, and we have the same thing there. That also is moaning, and because once again it doesn't have the correct name for send notification. Cool, so these are 2 now effectively are iNotification senders. So this is where the power comes in. What we can do up here, now we can declare a new type, iNotification sender. Let's call it notification sender. We can say it's null. And we can say if our person's preference is an SMS, now what we can do is we can assign our SMS sender here. Let's get rid of this. And if it's by email, we can assign our variable to be a new email sender. So the idea here is that we have a single variable where the type is iNotification sender, and here we can assign it to be either the implementation can either be that when we call send notification, it either sends an email or it sends a SMS. And the beauty about this is this can be completely defined or can be determined at runtime. So the idea is over here we would send and call send notification. And depending on whichever one has been assigned over here, it will send the correct notification. But we already have a problem here. This is going to be the first issue we run into. As soon as we start putting in the parameters here, so our from address is going to be which one? Is it going to be the email address or is it going to be the notification number? Because at this point here, we don't know which one we've got. So what we could do is we could actually go and check what type the notification sender is, but then that doesn't help us because then we're back to where we were in the first place. What would be better is if we had to change the way we've done our interface to make it a bit more flexible to allow for this sort of thing. So what we'll do is we'll create a constructor, and then here in the constructor we'll actually set our from address, and so here we'll go from address, and then we can have this set a local property called from address, and have this being set here from address equals from address. Whoops. Okay, so now we've solved that problem, but as you can see, it's now moaning about we've broken our own rules for notification sender. So we no longer match the contract. So what we need to do is we need to change our contract to say that contract doesn't actually contain the from address anymore, so that our email sender now matches our notification. And we need to do the same thing. We need to remove this from our SMS sender to say that it now matches the contract. So up here we can now say that this is person dot, and we have the same problem here. We'll need to include, if it's sending from an SMS, we want to go sender.mobile number, and if it's sending, this would be sender.email address, because at this point we know whether we're sending an SMS or not. At this point over here, we don't actually know, are we sending an SMS or an email? Because at this point we are referring to our notification sender is just an iNotification sender. It could be either one of these. We don't know which one it is. So now we have exactly the same problem. So here, what do we use? Do we call person.email address or do we call person.mobile number? Here we have the same problem with the two email address, so we'll do exactly the same thing. We'll create a new property called to address. So this will be now changing our contract again to only be sending the content in our notification. This needs to be person.email address. This will be our user's email address. And now finally with our email address this will work, because this will just be our content body. Last thing that remains is we need to do the same thing for our SMS sender, because we've now broken this. So okay, so this worked for the most part, but now this might bring us to another potential problem here. So let's take a minute to recap here and see what we've actually done. We've definitely made the code a bit more complicated if we don't know what we're doing. So we at least need to sort of appreciate the good things about what we've done and seeing how does the more complicated code benefit us. We've isolated our behavior into two separate classes, and we've made sure that they share a single behavior which we can use in the past. We can now, we're now safe to clean this up even further. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all this code into a separate method. So we're going to create a method called that's going to return an iNotification sender, and we're going to just call this get notification sender by type. Okay, so what we can do now is we can replace this here and say get this by type, and here we can pass in the person. So at this point it's pretty obvious that this was quite a bad design, and we really need to rather put this into a sender, create a new person class here. Okay, so this is the to person or the receiver, to person, and then we've got the sender and notification. So this won't be a sender address anymore, this will be person as the sender. So this will be sender address dot mobile number, this will be the sender dot email address, and then let's change the name of this to be receiver, because now we're at the point where we can start leveraging the power of the interfaces. Here we have our different implementations sitting in separate files. We can easily add a new one here at any time if we so choose. So this is if we suddenly want to have a new notification method, and I don't know, let's pretend we have a class that sends smoke signals. Okay, so smoke signal sender, for example, it's still a notification as long as it adheres to those rules. And once again, we would need to have our method that says send notification, and it just has that content. And then here we could return our smoke signal sender. And the beauty of this is the smoke signal sender doesn't actually need a from address or a to address, so the constructor doesn't take any parameters. So one of the other big problems we've got here is you might say, hang on, there's something wrong with our email. And email tends to always have a subject. So how do we handle that? We should be saying our code should actually mention the subject of the email. So there's one way we could do this, is what we could do as a basic start is we could add a subject to our notification, and we could make it an optional parameter. So we could subject, and then we could specify our subject in here. So let's say so here we could say subject, and this would be subject here, and we've broken our contract, so then we would have to adjust our contract. And what we could do is we'd be forced to change all our others, and then have the other ones have a blank option. So you can do this, but it's considered bad practice, and there's an entire principle in the Solid principles called the interface segregation principle. And what this pretty much says is that you shouldn't force other classes to use rules that they won't actually use. So here our smoke signal sender and our SMS sender won't use the subject. So that means it is a bad idea. It's a bad idea to force the subject in the notification. So we're going to undo this. So rather, the better option here is to enforce another rule by using a second interface here to enforce the subject. So let's create a second interface. Let's call it advanced notification sender. It's probably a bad name, but because it's not very specific. But let's just say, and the advanced notification sender has a additional string property called subject, for argument's sake. So what we can do is we can go to the email sender and have it implement the advanced notification sender as well, and it'll moan and say we are required to have a property called subject. And now we are safe to use our subject property here in our methodology. So at that point we are safe to know that let's see, does this all still work? So let's click this a few times. There's our smoke signal, SMS still works, and there's our subject. Okay, we haven't set a subject yet. We could set that, where would we set that? As a parameter over here, let's say subject. No, this is subject. And then let's run this. And here we go. What we've done here is we've improved the code flexibility by using polymorphism. Polymorphism in the way that at runtime, when we call this method send notification, this is changing the behavior of how send notification works based on whatever values are being passed to this method at the time. And at the time of us looking at this line of code, we have no idea what sort of notification is going to be sent, or what the behavior or the implementation of send notification is. We've made this code loosely coupled because this piece of code here is also, this code here is no longer coupled to a direct representation to either the email or the SMS. We can now actively remove these classes and the code over here will work exactly the same. And there's a big benefit there about it's very easy to add new versions or new implementations to this, like we did with the smoke sending signaler. And the fact that these are all individual classes, it means your teammates can work on individual ones on individual files. It's benefits for source control, and it's just easier to maintain in the future. Thank you for watching. I guess I'll see you in the next video. I don't know when I'll do another one of these tutorials again. I feel like this was a shambles.